Hey, my name is Festus.
I'm Jennifer. We actually met on Match.com.
Yeah.
And Festus had just gotten to Miami as a travel nurse, and I had gotten on Match kind of as a joke. And he was on there looking for a tour guide in Miami. And we connected, and what kind of drew him to me was the fact that I was speaking about God in my profile, and he could relate to that. So I remember his first message to me was, I see we have something in common in that we both put God first. And that's how he opened up the conversation.
Yep. And that's how we met. Who was I before? Nowhere near who I am today. That's for sure. She makes me a better person.
Oh.
But before I was kind of and she would say it not a loner. I don't want to say loner. It's a traveler. I was a traveler, and I've always traveled, so I had no kind of stability. Just kind of moved everywhere, and that was my job. I moved to a different place every 3 months. So it made it to where I couldn't ever really find love because I was always moving from here to there, and I never really had any kind of stability in my life. And when I moved to Miami, even then I was still trying to run away from it. Even after I had met her, I was still trying to get out
He calls it traveling. I call it running. He spent years every 3 months running to a new place. That's what I call it, not traveling. But we'll let you have that.
That's who I was before I met Jen. It's just I had no stability really. I just was all over the place, and when I wasn't satisfied at one moment, I'd be gone. It never crossed my mind to wait things out.
So for me, before Festus, I was on this journey of just really trying to find myself in God. So for like 2 years before meeting Festus, I was just focused on grad school. I wasn't dating, and just if I wasn't doing something for school, I was in my Bible and just really trying to establish my relationship with God. And it was during that time that I had made a commitment to God that I wanted to remain celibate until marriage. And so that was the first time in my life that I had made that decision and made that promise to God. So I kind of said, whoever the next person is that I meet, that I date seriously, I want that to be my husband. And so when I met Festus, I was like, okay, God, so when do I tell him that, that I'm on this journey of celibacy and this is off limits until marriage? And so, of course, God kind of showed me to have that conversation on the second date, which was kind of which was kind of awkward. But I kind of had prepared myself in the car driving to our second date. I kind of had a conversation with God, and I was like, well, I know this will probably be the last time I see him. Soften the blow. I know you're going to take me through this. It was nice to meet him. And I just kind of prepared myself that was the end. And then when I told him, his response was, you're not going to get rid of me that easy. And I was like, what? I still didn't believe him, and I didn't think I'd ever hear from him again after that. I thought he was just being nice to my face. Yeah. But then it just kind of continued from there.
Yeah.
Festus, how was that for you hearing that Jen was going to be celibate?
It actually wasn't like a huge surprise because that's something God had been speaking to me about also, is that, prior to her, the last 3 girlfriends I had, all 3 said the same thing to me. Wow. So it wasn't a shock. It wasn't a blow. It's almost like God had prepared me for it, and maybe that's what he was doing before. So, when I heard it, it was just like, it was nothing to me really. That's why my response was right then and there was, you're not going to get rid of me that easy. But I think, for most men, that's a hard thing to hear. I got lucky in that God had prepared me for it. I can't remember how I reacted the first time I heard something like that, but I think for most men that's a struggle. That's something that really think about whenever they hear that. But it's great when you're in a position where that doesn't even bother you.
And I don't think he realizes how much his response impacted me, because for him to say, "You're not going to get rid of me that easy," and then he also said, "I'm not surprised. I kind of figured this would come from you." That's something I had battled with, was like shame and guilt from my past. And like, I had a child at the age of 19. I wasn't married, all of these things. How am I going to sit and tell this man, "Oh, I'm celibate"? He's going to be looking at me like, "But you have a kid," you know? And I was like, and so I felt like I was going to be judged, but no, he didn't even see that. He just simply went to, "I'm not surprised." Like, he saw the new transformed me. Like, he didn't see any of that, even though I had a child and it was clear that I had a past. He didn't see any of that. And so his response really, really, it brought my faith to another level, because I left that day feeling so secure in my obedience and my walk with God, because I never could have imagined that that date would have gone that way. So when it did, I was like, "That's only you, God. There's no way. There's no way." And I had doubts too. Like, I was like, my dating life is over now that I've made this decision. We'll see what happens, but I'm okay being single. I have a child. I have a great life, a good career. If I don't ever get married, I think I'm okay with that. That was kind of where I was. I just wanted to honor God. And so if that's what it took, but I was in that same position where I didn't think that men like him existed. And if they did, they were far away and nowhere near me. And nobody was going to be okay with waiting until marriage.
Wow.
Part of the story we haven't shared is that we actually ended up breaking up. And then so it took us a while to get back together. But in that time where we were broken up, the basically she got tired of hearing of every 3 months my contract came up and it was whether I was going to leave or not. And I would just struggle with that, and I would stay, and she just didn't want to live 3 months at a time anymore. So we ended up breaking up. And in that time is when I really started to speak to God about, one thing she said to me before we broke up was that don't come back to me unless it's a direct word from God for you to do so. Mm-hmm. And that's something that really stuck with me, even though she didn't remember even saying that to me. So, and I've always, I grew up in a Christian home, and, I've always had family and everybody encouraged me to pray for my wife, and and I've always said that prayer, but not really seriously. God, I want a God-fearing woman and all that. But I also wasn't in the time in my life where I was thinking about marriage when I said those prayers. So this time after we were broken up, I started to then, it took a little while, but we were broken up for almost 2 years, maybe a year and a half. And in that time is when I started to pray to God to show me who my wife would be. And I wasn't necessarily praying about her because we had broken up, and I saw it as, God, I guess that's not who it's supposed to be. But I think that's when I started, praying seriously about who my wife would be. And as things worked out and we started to get closer and closer to each other, that's when I also, began to fast about it. And took it a step further, okay, if once God started showing me a little bit that it might be her with all the signs that were going on, I started really, just praying and fasting about it. So I guess for me, it started right after we had broken up, maybe a couple months after we had broken up, where I felt like, okay, it's time for me to start praying about who it would be, because I felt something there. I don't know if that was it, but so I made my prayer very general. I think God speaks to everybody differently, obviously. For me, God usually speaks to me through dreams. At the time, for me, it always changes, but at the time, He speaks to me through dreams. So in that time, as I prayed, it was almost like God took me, and it was a moment where I would see things in my head, or like go through a day and relive that day in my dream. So I started to kind of do that with her. So I would maybe have a moment where we were at church or something like that, and God will bring that back to me in a dream. And I'm just like, why are we, I'm broken up with this girl. Why is this girl coming back in my dreams? And, I started seeing small signs like that. So I started praying more about it. And as, time gets closer, my aunt then started saying, I was seeking my aunt for counsel from my aunt. And she was like, you need to really hear from God. She said exact same words that she said, but she didn't know anything about her. She said, you need to really hear from God before you make any moves about whoever it is that you're going to marry. And it's not that you think you heard from God, or you think this is the person, but it's a direct word from God. However you hear God, it's a direct word from God. So for me, that's when I really started praying to God, and just, and fasting. I think I was fasting 3 days. I would fast Thursday, Friday, Saturday of every week for a while. And one of those days would be for the woman I'm supposed to marry. Eventually it shifted for her, for that one day shifted to be her, once I kind of started seeing signs. And, now I'm praying that, God, if it's her, please reveal it. Please do this. Please let me see it. And slowly, whether it be at church or be it in around Miami, God started to put us together in the same places. And it's very strange how whether it be at church sometimes, I remember we would sit in the same place, but we were never ever at church together. So I would sit there on the days that she wasn't there. I guess God arranged it that way. And the days that I wasn't there, she'd be sitting there. So one day we both showed up, and I'm like, hey, you're in my seat.
And I was like, this has been my seat since before you were even coming here. And he was like, what?
Yeah. So, small signs like that, or we'd be at church and they'd, I think one time they started playing a song that I wouldn't say it was our song, but it was a song that we recognized and we laughed about all the time. And it wasn't a Christian song or anything like that, but for that to be playing in church while we're sitting right next to each other was very strange. But yeah, I prayed so much about it that as God started to show it to me, it really encouraged me to pray harder. And the advice I had gotten from my aunt to hear from God was the hardest thing in the world, because I think at times I felt like, okay, it's her, and I really want to go ahead and tell her, but I couldn't do it just because of what she had said and what my aunt had said to me. God had taken me through a journey where it was a time where I had actually gotten injured. And that time took me away from everybody for a while and just kind of sat me down, got me in the Word. I couldn't move. So, it was one of those times where God kept me from running by physically keeping me from running.
What were you doing?
Yeah. So in that time, I really got in the Word. And, being in the Word so much, it really just made it easier to say, you know what, God, this is all yours. I don't care anymore, because I'm at the point where I'm really broken. And whatever you want to happen, it's okay with me, because there's nothing else I can do. So that's what I think that time where he sat me down and made me really get closer to him, that relationship with God, that's what makes it a lot easier to surrender that. And for me, that's what it was.
I broke up with him the first time, and then still was trying to be friends with him. Of course, he still wanted me in his life. So he was like, okay, we're broken up, but I'm going to be friendly to her, and we're going to still communicate. We're friends,
I mean, I
whatever.
think what it was also is just, I value friendship so much. And I guess that was different to her. And because of my time here, we didn't have time to really build a friendship or anything. For what she knew, I was only here for 3 months. That's not enough time to build a friendship and then jump into a relationship. So we just jumped into a relationship.
Yeah, we skipped the friendship
Exactly.
part, and I think that was
Yeah.
That was a big piece that we missed in the beginning.
Yeah. So when we broke up, I think that's I guess it was her choice to break up. But when we did, I wasn't too hurt by it, because I felt like I still if she was a friend of mine, it's funny. If she was a friend of mine, I would have felt it more. And so that's something that we have to work on now, is build a friendship. So breaking up really helped us to then go backwards and build that friendship.
Although during that 2 years, we didn't really
talk, but every
didn't
once
really
in a while
talk.
she'd send me a message or something. I'm praying for you, and and it was always on point. And like I would be going through something, and I get a random message from her. I'm praying for you. It's very timely. I almost felt like she was watching me or something.
But it was a really challenging decision, because I was so sure, because I had prayed so much before that, even going on that first date with him. So, and then his response when I told him that I was waiting till marriage, like all of those things, it just seemed so perfect, and it seemed like like it was God answering my prayers and bringing this person into my life. So for me to then come to a decision where, okay, maybe I was wrong, maybe I didn't hear God right, maybe this isn't the person, and I need to let this go, like that was really, really hard. I'm like, okay, I prayed that the next person would be my husband, and I did things your way, God. Like, for the first time in my life, I surrendered my dating relationships to you, and I did this your way, and it didn't work out. And I was devastated, and it was really, really hard. But I knew that that continuing to every 3 months wonder if he's still going to be around, I couldn't deal with that turmoil. So I think that pain, more than anything, is what made me let go. I'm not going to say that God showed me to end it, because that wasn't clear. There was a lot of confusion. I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing. And so it was really hard. So I think it was the pain of not knowing if he was still going to be around and all of that, that led me to just end it. And so I did, during that 2 years that we were broken up, I did at moments question if I made the decision to end it out of my own will, and if that was something that I wasn't supposed to have done. And now I lost something that, was a blessing from God, because I couldn't wait and be patient. Because even though he kept saying he was going to leave every 3 months, I still it's like God was giving me this peace that he wasn't going anywhere. But I still battled with it. And so it's like, I got to a point where I was like, maybe I should have just rested in God and continued to just go on the journey with him, because God was going to keep him around. But now I see how much we both grew spiritually during that time apart. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we would have gotten to the place we needed to be. And ultimately, I think it would have taken us longer to get to marriage, even with the 2-year breakup. I think it would have taken us longer to get to marriage, because we both loved God when we met each other, but that relationship, that spiritual maturity, and the ability of him to be the head of our household spiritually and all of that, that wasn't my ability to submit and allow him, because I've always been a very type A, controlling, running the show type of person. And he's the opposite, the complete opposite. And so if I wanted to take the lead, he would have allowed it. And that's not where we needed to have a successful marriage. So I think it would have taken us a really long time to get there. But once we broke up, during that time, God took us both on a journey. And once I got over that initial anger of, okay, God, I did things your way and it didn't work out and all of that, I began to really connect with God again. And I actually did this fast. I called it 40 days of restoration. So I fasted for 40 days. And during that 40 days, part of the fast was that whether it was a friend or not, no contact via text, phone, calls, nothing with any men, period, because I felt like that was a distraction. Because I was in a season where I was like, okay, I just want to get over him and I want to move on. And so it was easy for counterfeits, is what I call them, to then, or exes, to then kind of come and try to get in, and you allow them in because you're in this season of you want to get over the last one. And so, and I did make that mistake. When Festus and I were broken up, I did get into another relationship with a male friend who was like, oh, okay, well now maybe this friendship that we have means something else. And it didn't. And it was one of those missionary dating situations where he didn't share my passion for God, but I thought I could change him. And I allowed myself to get into that because I was being impatient. And I had tried things God's way and it didn't work out. And so I made that mistake. And I realized it pretty early on that I was doing the wrong thing. I mean, every Sunday that he was supposed to come to Trinity Church with me and would cancel, I'd come into church, and who would be 2 rows in front of me with their Bible in hand? This guy. And it drove me crazy. I'm like, seriously? Like, and it's like God was putting it in my face. You went from this to this. What are you doing? You know? And again, this was after he was supposed to have already been gone. And so, you know, he's still here. And so every time I was going through one of those moments, I'd get to church, he'd be there. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is annoying. I'm like, I know you're trying to show me something, God, but can you use someone else to show it to me and not him, because it's really annoying. And so I eventually got to a place where I knew I needed to end that. And I simply prayed to God and I said, I don't know that I have the strength to do this, but can you just remove him from me? And that's literally what happened. I still to this day do not know why he disappeared. Well, I know why. I know that God removed him, but there was never a reason. He just kind of stopped calling, stopped texting. And then I remember on Mother's Day, he sent me a message saying, you're a wonderful woman. I feel like such a coward. Never heard another word from him. And I was like, okay. I was like, thank you, God, because I knew I needed to be out of that situation. And it was about 3 weeks after that then the lines of communication began to open again between Festus and I, like just little by little. And he didn't know that me and the guy had broken up, so he even said to me in a message, I see that you found someone. I'm really happy for you. You look happy. And I didn't want to reply saying, well, we're not together anymore, because then I felt like I was pushing something, and I really, really, really wanted to leave that to God. I'm like, so I didn't say anything. I was like, well, God, he can continue to believe that I'm in a relationship. You will let him know that I'm not, if it's supposed to be him. So I didn't say anything. And I think over time, he just eventually figured it out, because I never actually came out and said.
I never thought it was going to last anyway.
So during, so I think it was after that relationship ended was when I did the 40-day fast restoration, no contact with men. And when I tell you that at that point, every man in Trinity Church was interested in me, it was like, seriously? Like, I've been coming here all this time and you never even looked my way. But once I'm fasting and I don't even want to speak to man, I'm like, no text messages, no nothing. Like, now everybody wants to start approaching me. And I was like, no. So I really stuck to it. And during that time, I just really, I was fasting, and I also read that book, Lady in Waiting. And I just really, really connected with God. And then that's when I had a dream. And in my dream was was our engagement party. And I was like, okay, God, this has to just, because I'm not really a dreamer. So I was like, this can't mean something. Like, no way. We aren't even really speaking. Like, we say hi at church, whatever, but that's about it. I send him a text message when you prompt me to, because I feel like in my spirit something's wrong with him and I need to pray. I'll send him encouraging scriptures and stuff like that. But that was very random, like once every 2 to 3 months. It wasn't like a consistent thing. So when I had that dream, I was like, this doesn't make any sense. The very next day, I come to church. So I had the dream on a Saturday. I come to church on Sunday, and I usually sit on the left side. The usher ushers me to the right. I'm highly annoyed because I don't want to sit on the right side because I always sit on the left. I go and I sit in my seat, and of course, as soon as I sit down, I see that 2 rows in front of me is him. I see the back of his head. I'm like, okay. And then that happens to be the day that the song that he was talking about, after worship is done, Zach Freeman and one of the other people on the worship team go up and do like a duet together. And it wasn't even a Christian song. And it was not even like relevant at that time anymore. Like it was an old song from when we had dated like a year and a half before. And I was like, okay. So then I just kind of started crying and I was like, this is weird. And so then we see each other after church, we say hi, and that was that. And I'm like, that totally went over his head. He didn't even hear the song. It didn't mean anything to him, whatever. And I leave. And then I just kind of asked God to show me the dream again, if that was him and not just something that was random. And I had the same exact dream 3 times.
Wow.
I was like, okay. So then I remember the date too. It was July 25th. So I'll never, I wrote it in my journal. I journaled about it, and I'll never forget that. And so that happened, and then it was just like from there, we just began to run into each other. I had invited him a year before, or back when we were dating, to come to Trinity to noon prayer, and he never ever came. And then there was a whole month that I wasn't coming on Wednesdays because of my work schedule. Apparently, during that month is when he started coming and sat in my exact seat that I always sat in. So then when my schedule changed, and this is a few weeks after that dream, and I start coming to noon prayer again, I'm there in noon prayer, I'm in worship, and I'm kind of crying out to God about him, and then worship ends. I open my eyes and he's right next to me.
Wow.
And we look at each other. He was like, what are you doing in my seat? And I was like, this is my seat. I've been coming here for he was like, I've been coming for the last month and I've never seen you, and I always sit right there. I was like, okay, this is weird. So then I kept in my routine and kept coming to noon prayer on Wednesdays, and he was coming too, but we were never speaking to each other saying, oh, are you coming to noon prayer? It was just happening. And then one day, Pastor Chino, he's up there giving like the little mini message during prayer, and he says, your miracle could be sitting right next to you. And I just kind of looked at him,
thing ever.
and I was like, he didn't get that. Like,
very awkward.
I left there feeling like, I even had to message him. I'm like, what did you think about prayer today? And he was like, oh, it's nice. And I'm like, God, really? Like, I'm like, every sign you're like throwing it at him, and he's just not seeing it. And so during that time he was receiving these signs, I just didn't know that he was.
Well, I
thought it was going over his head.
I had to suppress these signs because during that time is always also when I was, under strict rules to myself that, I would have to hear from God before I would act.
So,
and if I allowed these signs to get into my head, I would, I wouldn't really see God's voice anymore. I would just say, okay, yeah, it's got to be her. This happened, and this happened, and this happened. So for me, it was just like, it wasn't that it was going over my head. Yeah, I saw it all. I just chose.
But zero emotion, nothing. Like I would have never known. I was like, wow, he's just really moved on from this. But God's going to show him, because I had that dream and I know that God is eventually going to show him. And so these things just kept happening. There was a series at Rendezvous, Summer Side Piece, we happened to be sitting next to each other, and Rich Jr. is giving the examples of a godly man, like for dating and stuff like that, and the woman. So 3 things about a man that you should be looking for, 3 things about a woman you should be looking for. And when he's giving the examples, he just happens to use the name Jennifer. I'm sitting right next to Festus, and once again, I'm like, he's writing in his, but he doesn't write down when that part happens. So I was like, God, he didn't even write this down. Like, how more clear is that? Like, that's not random. He just said my name. And all the things that Rich described, I felt were very on point with what.
If Rich said Jennifer Cruz, then okay, yeah, I might catch it. There's a lot of Jennifers out there.
So once again, I was like, okay, I'm waiting, but I still knew at that point. So there was like, I wasn't seeing anybody else. Like, it didn't matter how nice of a guy you were. If you approached me, I already knew who he was, and I was going to wait. It didn't matter how long it took. At that point, I had already been waiting a year and a half. I'm like, I'll keep waiting, like, because now I feel like I have confirmation from God that this is it. So I just waited. So that was July 25th. And then in October of that year, God kind of brought me together with 4 other women from this church. And we began a fast together where we fasted for each other. We all wrote down our prayer requests before the fast even started. We had them typed out, printed, and we brought them to church with us, and we asked Pastor Linda to anoint us and bless us. And she did that, and all of us were praying about our husbands and fasting about other things as well. But we did 1 week entirely just about our husbands, and we all had listed the things that we felt in our heart that also, according to the word, is what we were looking for in a husband. And a lot of the things on my list, I saw the potential for that in Festus, but it wasn't there yet. Like, I knew like that a lot of those things would be him, but those things hadn't manifested in his life yet. I knew that God needed to work in those areas. And one by one, like during our season of friendship and as I'm fasting, because this was like a 7-week fast that we did, me and the girls. And I'm like checking these things off, like as our friendship is evolving, and I'm seeing him like serving at church and all these things. And I was like, wow, like it was just a different person. And I always knew that side of him was there. And, but I think us being together, we would have hindered that growth in each other. So that started to happen, and then the fast ended, and we just started to get closer and closer. And eventually, I kind of felt in my spirit that my birthday was going to be when we got back together. And so I had this birthday dinner on March 23rd, which was 2 days before my birthday. But I kind of resonated in my mind that that was my birthday, since that's the day I was having my birthday dinner. I invited him to come. I didn't think he was going to come because, of course, at that same time, like, all hell was breaking loose in his life. All kinds of craziness was happening. I'm like, okay, yeah, he's got a lot of personal reasons why he shouldn't come to my birthday dinner. He's not going to come. And so then I kind of felt embarrassed that I had told the girls, like, I think what I've been fasting and praying about, I think this is about to happen on my birthday. And so then I was kind of embarrassed because I was like, okay, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I heard God wrong about this one. And so he comes to my birthday dinner. Nothing happens. And so I was like, okay, well, that's embarrassing. I guess I'm wrong. And then the very next day I was leaving to go on a trip out of the country. So I'm at the airport, and just all kinds of craziness ends up happening with my flight, and I'm not able to leave. And so then he was the closest person that could pick me up from the airport. So he picks me up, and so we end up then spending my flight was changed to the next night, so then I was actually leaving on my birthday, we end up spending that whole day together because of all the rearranging with my flight schedule. I should have been gone, but I ended up being here on my birthday. And we ended up being together that day. And come to find out later, that was actually what he had been praying for, was that he would be able to tell me that he loves me on my birthday. So he thought that was going to be the Wednesday of my dinner. But he hadn't gotten the confirmation from God yet. And he got it just in time to be able to then, on my birthday, tell me. And had my entire flight schedule and all of that not changed, he wouldn't have been able to tell me on my birthday because I would have been in Ecuador. But because everything changed, I was still here. So then my best friend who was traveling with me later, she was like, oh my gosh, so I went through that entire travel nightmare just so that he could tell you he loves you for your birthday. I was like, yeah, I guess so. So his prayers rearranged my entire schedule. And so I was right, what I had felt in my spirit, that's what was going to happen.
Yeah, and for me, I guess getting to that confirmation, my aunt had told me, just you can't. I was getting frustrated because I had fasted, I had prayed, nothing was happening, and I was almost sure. It's that feeling that every guy or girl, you have that feeling. This is the person, like it, like they always say, "How did you know it?" You just knew it. Yeah, and I was at that point where we had slowly, once we had built that friendship, and that was really something I valued. Like I really was satisfied, and I really felt like this was the one. It was going to be her, but I still didn't have a direct word from God. Something she had said, something that my aunt had said. So I would talk to my aunt all the time, and she was just like, "Okay, if you have seriously done everything that you can, as far as asking God for a sign to show you that this is the person. You've done all your prayers, you've done all your fasting, you've done now maybe it's time you give God a sign." I was just like, what? What do you mean give God a sign? And she brings me to the part of the scripture where Abraham, I think, it sends his servant out to look for a wife for Isaac, and the servant says, whatever woman comes and gives me water and also gives my camel some water, would be the one. So that's the sign that the servant gave God, that was the prayer, that's the sign that he gave. So I was like, okay, that's the sign. I need to give God a sign. But me being like a difficult person, I wanted to be really sure. So I wasn't going to give God a general, sign or whatever. I told God, I knew I would never take money from her. I have a hard time taking money from any woman. So I told God, if she gives me $250, and I put a specific price on it, $250. I don't know where I got the number, but I said, if she gives me $250, I will know that's her. And then, so at the time I was going through some financial trouble as far as taxes and stuff like that. My bank account had been cleaned out because, don't ever live in another state and not pay taxes there. It's a long, if you travel a lot and you live around different places, Uncle Sam will come for you. So, my bank account would be cleared out and everything. And, it was time for me to pay my rent. And I think we both knew my landlord at the time. So she went behind my back and actually paid my rent. So then I'm wondering, I'm asking her, hey, who paid my rent? And I'm not getting it. And I'm like, did Jen pay my rent? Did Jen pay my rent? And she had specifically told her not to tell me. So she, I go to her birthday dinner, and I had been praying at the time. I didn't know these two were related. Know that the rent situation was related to me praying that I'd be able to tell her on her birthday that I loved her. So that was my prayer at the time, because I felt like I knew it, but I was like, God, I need you to show it to me, because that would be a perfect day to tell her that I want to tell her on her birthday. It's on the 25th, and 25 is my number, and it's just, everything was just perfect. That would be the perfect time. So on her birthday dinner, I was going through a lot, but I knew I had to be there, and I went there. We sat there. I could hear her friends chatter about, I can hear the chatter in the background. Looks like you guys' wedding right now.
Because I was wearing a white dress.
She's wearing white, and I have a suit on, and I'm sitting right next to her. And so, I'm hearing all that. It was a good night, and then towards the end of the night, we're leaving. And I kept asking her, so I finally said, you know what? Did you pay my rent? Like, I need to know. And she says, well, I always wanted to pay you back for that time my car got towed, and you just took care of it. And it just struck me that was $250 when her car got towed, and I took care of it.
Yeah.
And that's when I was just like, ding.
Yes.
That's God's word.
Because I
to me.
specifically
Like,
said $250. I was
Yeah,
like,
she
well,
was
I
like,
always wanted to give you back the $250 from when my car got towed. And he was like, what?
I was just like,
He had forgot about that $250.
Yeah, and I was
He
like-
didn't even know it was $250.
so that was
From
when I
2
was,
years
and we
before.
left, and and I didn't have the courage to say it that time. And I never said it. I went home and I was like, man, that was your moment. You should have said it. God like put that light in. That was your confirmation right there. And I never did it. So I guess we all had in our head that was her birthday, but it really wasn't. Because it really wasn't. So the next day when we ended up spending the whole day together because her flight problems or whatever, I dropped her off at the airport that night, and I still didn't have the courage to do it. Because it's just one of those things. Like so I dropped her off. I'm going to Trinity. I think they had a night service.
It was Good Friday, actually.
I'm going to Trinity, and like as clear as day, like I'm still like driving away from the airport, and the Holy Spirit says, "You asked to be able to tell her on her birthday, so why didn't you?"
After he had
and that's
already
when
dropped me
that's
off
when
at
it
the
rings in
airport.
my head that today's her birthday. So I ignored the Holy Spirit. I went to church. I sat there, everything. There was something that happened. I can't remember that was significant. But anyways, we left church. I went home, and then it's almost midnight, and like my heart starts racing, and it's just like pounding, and it's just like very uncomfortable. I can't lay down. I can't move. I can't do it. I gotta do it. I gotta do it. So I picked up the phone, and I was able to tell her that I loved her, and like everything settled.
Right before I got on my flight.
Right before she got on her flight,
So I'm like
everything
sitting
settled.
in the airport, and this man who I'm friends with, but it's very platonic. Like
Yeah.
he shows zero emotion, no affection, because he doesn't want to
We
lead
weren't back
me on
together,
or whatever.
so.
But I still know that this is my husband, and so I'm like in my heart very affectionate towards him. But never in a million years did I think. I always pictured him coming back into my life and us dating and progressing to that whole I love you thing. I never imagined that would be how he entered back. Like his first words of getting us coming back together was I love you. So I'm sitting in the airport, I get this message, and I just like burst into tears, and I was like, I feel like I've been waiting my whole life for you to say that. Because he had never said it.
Yeah.
Even when we had dated before even. And I know he's not someone to just throw that word around. So when he did say it, I was like, it just really touched me because I knew it meant something. And so I guess it worked out that he waited until after he dropped me off at the airport, because I probably wouldn't have left and gone on my trip if all that would have happened before. But it was like right before midnight, right before my birthday was over officially, that the message came through, and then I had to get on a plane and go out of town.
Yeah.
And then we were able to then connect all the pieces of the story, because a month prior to that, one of my friends that I had fasted with, Jordan, she sends me a scripture from Genesis, and she was like, I felt like I'm supposed to send this to you. And it was the story about finding a wife for Isaac. So I read it and I messaged her back, and all this, because it's all messages, we were able to look back at it and look at the timing of when all of that happened.
And that's about the same time that had been brought to my attention for me to start giving God a sign about that.
So she sends me that scripture. I read it and I message her back. I was like, it's a beautiful story, but what did God speak to you about through it? Because I didn't get anything. And she was like, I don't know. I just felt like I was supposed to send it to you. So I was like, okay, well, it was nice. And then out of my mind, and I never thought about it again. And so then when he then shares with me the whole thing about giving God a sign and him being led to that story in Genesis and the exact verses, it's then that I remember that Jordan had sent me those verses exactly 1 month prior in February, and I didn't understand why she was led to send me that. And then when we look at the dates, it was the same time that he had began to pray about those verses and give God a sign. And so it was crazy being able to connect it all.
Which I'm not saying everybody go ahead and like start giving God a sign of who want, because
Everybody's story is different.
And it's one of those things, like, you don't understand how much I prayed and fasted before I got to the part where I have to give God a sign. So it's not just you get up one day and say, let me go give God a sign to, give me this woman or whatever. It's going to take a lot on your part. And once you've exhausted all efforts, is when my aunt was like, once you've exhausted all efforts, and we had been praying for months with her, by myself, just for months. And so once all that was exhausted, before I actually came to that point of giving God a sign.
And also the timing of when he did that and when my friend sent me the scripture from Genesis was also the same week that Rich Sr. had the service for the singles in February for marriage in 18 months. And I went up to the altar and I received that blessing. And we were one of the many couples that ended up married in 18 months after that.
And from that, what I learned is that God is very, very calculated. Everything, what a word that he gave me for this year is that nothing is random. And that's something I wish I knew back then. Not every single person you meet, every single interaction you have, God put that there for a reason. And then nothing is random. He's so calculated with everything that happens. And you can look back years and then you'll put the pieces together. But yeah. So we had gotten back together. We had been together for, I think, a little over 6 months now. And I was traveling to New York for work at the time. So I would go, we were actually taking a class at Trinity Church, Prepared to Last. And I was traveling to New York at the time. So I would go to New York during the week and I would come back here for the weekend. And then on Monday morning, she'd drop me off at the airport. Friday or Saturday, I come back and go to the class on Sunday. We were doing that, I think, for like 7 weeks, the class was. And in that time, I think 2 or 3 weeks before the class ended, God gave me a dream. And it was a very clear picture of where it was me again, asking her for a hand in marriage. And it was a very clear picture. It was everybody that was supposed to be there. I mean, who the photographer was going to be, where we were going to eat at, where it was going to take place, where I was going to kneel down, like what time. Everything was just specific in that dream. And I woke up like freaking out because I'm like, I've only been with her for like 6 months now. And then I was just like, okay, once again, I ignore the Holy Spirit. I ignore God. And I go to sleep. I have the same dream over again. The only difference in the dream was the kind of ring she wants. So at that point, I think that second time is it's where the first time scared me. The second time gave me peace. And once I had peace, I was like, okay, good. Now I can start planning how this is going to happen. So I started reaching out to people that were in the dream. And it's so amazing how everybody that was in the dream, because I was going to do this on a weekday. People have work and everything, but everybody that was in the dream was completely available up for it. People that I wanted to be there but were not in the dream said, no, sorry. So, because there's, people in both our lives that I really wanted to be there, but they were not part of God's dream. So they couldn't be there for whatever reason. As much as I pushed it, they were like, sorry, I can't make it. So I was going back and forth to New York. The ring situation is actually funny also. um, I went to K Jewelers, or I had a friend who had just gotten married, and he sent me his ring guy who was also in New York. So he was like, oh, okay, I sent the email and everything. We were supposed to meet on a certain day, but then I was walking and, prompted by the Holy Spirit, go into this K Jewelers, and I went in there. I saw the ring and I was like, that's it, and I knew that was it, but I still had to meet with this other ring guy. And out of nowhere, this ring guy just texts or he emails me and says, "It was nice meeting you. Sorry that you can't buy my ring." And I was just like, "What? I never met you." Or our meeting is like, and he completely like just acts like we've met already and everything. So I was like, because I had prayed about God, if I really think this is the ring, but I'm not sure, but and this guy completely was convinced that we had met and I don't want his ring. And, we've exchanged messages back and forth. And so I went ahead and I bought the ring that, I decided that's what God was speaking to me about. And I bought that ring. And as soon as I walk out the store, the guy sends me an email and says that, sorry, I completely mixed you up with somebody. The timing of it all was just ridiculous. So I'm still coming back to on the weekends to Miami, and I came back and just everything and I talked to everybody, set everything up. I even during that weekend went by the place that God had showed me to do it. Started praying and walking around there, and people thought I was crazy because I was praying in the spirit, just walking around at midnight. But I wanted everything to be perfect, and I wanted it. I had the dream, and I knew it was a God dream, so I just wanted it to be exactly the way He had given it to me. So I spent a lot of time just praying over the place. And then so I was in Miami for the weekend, and she was taking me back to the airport for New York to go to New York. She takes me to the airport, just right on schedule like always. She leaves, and I take an Uber. Came back, and I was here for 2 days that she didn't know about that I was here. I was just messaging her like I was in New York. I even had like my cousin like Snapchatting with my account in New York, making it seem like I'm there. And we had a friend of ours go to have a dinner with her at the location, and she comes by, and there I was, and I popped out of there, and she's like, "What are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here." And I get on one knee.
Talk about being caught off guard.
Yeah,
Nails weren't done, no makeup, hair a mess. Like I just thought I was having lunch with a friend.
I told just a few people, and I think they tried to get her nails done and all that, but she's a difficult person. So, yeah, it happened that day, and we had dinner there, and then went to see some friends after that.
So when I shared earlier about my dream that I had on July 25th, that was our engagement. So after the whole proposal, I thought everything was done. And then Festus says we're going to go have a drink with a friend. And so then I'm thinking, I didn't realize there were more surprises. We get there, and he had gotten together all of my friends, and everybody was there, and it was our engagement party, so to speak. And it was exactly like the dream I had had when I felt like I got the confirmation that he was my husband. I mean, the dream was exactly, to the point of people standing up and toasting to us and speaking about how they've watched our relationship evolve because they knew the story. And that was my dream. And so then it actually happened exactly how I had seen it. And so I never knew I knew that dream was God's confirmation that he was my husband, but I did not know that dream would actually manifest that way. Like, he knew nothing about that dream. I had never told him. And because I didn't ever want it to be recreated because I had shared it. So I never told him about it ever until after all that happened. And then I told him about all of that. So that was July 25th. We got back together March 25th. He proposed on October 25th. And the other part of that is that October 25th happened to be that fast that I mentioned that I had with my friends at church, where we fasted for weeks. And there was a week where we were fasting specifically for my husband. That fast actually ended on October 25th. And exactly 1 year later, on October 25th, is when he proposed. And he had no idea about that fast or those dates or any of that. He just knew that he had to propose on that day. And he actually tried not to propose on that day because it was on a Tuesday and it was so random. And he's like, no, I want to propose on a weekend. But God really impressed on him that it had to be on October 25th.
I originally wanted to wait and do it on Christmas, but God had other plans.
He did not know any of this stuff. And his plan was to propose at 5:30 was the time I was supposed to get there. I ended up being a little bit early. So he literally ended up down on one knee at 5:25.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's so crazy. The number 25 for some
My name
reason.
in the Bible, Acts 25.
Yeah, Festus is in the Bible. That was another annoying thing. Like after we had broken up and I'm like frustrated and trying to get in the Word and reconnect with God, and I decide to read the book of Acts and study the book of Acts, and Festus isn't like, that is not a name that you hear all the time. I never even knew it was in the Bible. And then I learned after we broke up that Festus is in the Bible. And I was like, really? Like I had to like keep rereading it over and over because I was like, my eyes are playing tricks on me. No way is this happening right now.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get this man out of my mind, and here he is in my Bible.
But yeah, it's amazing. Like everything happened in about 7 months. 7 months. We got married. We got engaged.
We got back together 7 months later.
We got engaged. 7 months later.
7 months later, we got married.
And we didn't plan it all. We just asked God to give us a date, and that's when he pointed us to. The dream just told me everything. It was like, yeah, the dream I had everything. It was like, God was like, this day, you're going to go and you're going to, because I could have came here and I could have came to Miami. She could have took me there, and then the very next day I could have came back and done it. But I was here for 2 extra days because God wanted it to be that day. So I didn't really understand the significance of it. Hadn't thought it was the 25th or anything like that. We put all that together later, but I just, it's weird that you could have a dream and nobody mentioned the date or anything, but in my head, I knew what day it was in the dream. So it was never, that question's interesting because it was never something that I ever thought about. It had to be this day because that's what God said. I just oh, that's what it was in the dream, but there was no calendar anywhere. In my head, it was just, that's the day. Yeah.
And I was always worried about I knew we'd be getting engaged, and I'm like, I wonder how this is going to go because Festus is not a planner, at all. That is just not one of his spiritual gifts. He is everything at the last minute. He works best under pressure. And that's how he does things. I'm a big time planner, so I could easily plan an engagement and like all the little details. So when it actually happened, I was just shocked by the attention to detail and how everything was just orchestrated so perfectly. And I'm like, how did he do this? I didn't even know he had this in him to be able to plan. I always thought our engagement was going to be very random. He's just okay, let's do it, because that's just how he is. And I was like, I'll be okay with that. But in my heart, I wanted something thought out and planned. But I would have been fine either way, but God knows your heart. And so God literally gave it to him.
Yeah.
Detail by detail, exactly how I would have wanted it. I never showed him a ring. I never talked to him about a ring. I never gave him any specifics about what I would have wanted. And God showed him exactly. I mean, God truly knows you better than you know yourself. And so then after he proposed, then he explained to me that God, I was like, how did you pull this off? He was like, I can't take any credit at all. God literally showed me every single detail. Yeah. So God knew my heart. And God knew his weaknesses in terms of being a procrastinator and not planning.
Yeah.
So he was like, let me make it real easy for Festus and let me just show him exactly what he's going to do, what day he's going to do it, every detail, because I know my daughter and I know what
She
this is
wants.
going to mean to her and what she wants. So let me just let him know. And so God cares about all those little details that are important to you. He really does. And so when you wait on him and you truly allow him to write your love story, I mean, it is just bigger than you could ever imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I couldn't have written this for myself. Like, people always say you guys should write a book. And I'm like, God wrote that story. Like, he really did. Like, you can't make this stuff up. You just can't. I mean, even the best writers that write fiction novels, they cannot come close to God's stories that he writes. It just doesn't even come close. So he wrote us a bestseller.
Yeah.
And it's just, I never could have imagined, like, even when I was at a place in my life where I felt like I finally had self-worth, I loved myself more than from the people I could have potentially married.
The counterfeits.
The counterfeits. That was a prayer that I prayed for the 2 years that we were broken up. The exact words were, God, I pray that you shield Festus from the counterfeits.
And it worked.
And so when I told him that after the fact, he was like, that's why I had no dating life these last 2 years. He was like, no, it makes sense. I was like, yep. And it's funny because he started going, he transitioned over to VU Church when they first opened. And there were a lot of women there that were interested in him. By this point, I knew he was my husband. He just didn't know it yet. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of women there that were interested in him. And he literally could not see them. I mean, attractive women like that were blatantly like showing him their interest. He literally was blinded to them, like totally oblivious. Like he didn't see them at all.
No idea.
And it was just funny to be able to watch that and see that because I already knew. Mm. So I wasn't at all threatened by it. I was like, he doesn't know yet, but God's not going to allow him to see them. And he didn't. And it was really, really funny to watch. Like, he is like, so, I'm like, this girl is throwing herself at him and he is so oblivious. Like, and I had friends that would see it at the church too. Like, one of my friends that was in my prayer group, she'd be like, you should see this. She was like, these girls are so interested. I mean, they're actually sending friends, guy friends, up to Festus to ask him if he's single. And Festus still doesn't get it. Like, he doesn't even see it. And she was like, it's hilarious. I was like, thank you, Jesus. Like, it's not, there were counterfeits for him. You know, they can be a tremendous blessing to someone else, but they were not for him. And I knew that they weren't for him. It wasn't my place to intervene or say anything. God really took care of all of that. Like, he didn't have to offend anybody or anything. Like, he literally was blinded to them and did not see them. And that was my prayer.
Yeah. Thank you.
Because of everything that happened and us being so sure and so certain that God brought us together and that he ordained this marriage, any challenges, marriage is challenging. And so any challenges you face, there's no doubt. You know, if you didn't have that 100% confirmation from God that your spouse was your spouse, ordained by him, anytime you reach a difficult situation in your marriage or life happens, you could easily question and doubt, did I marry the right person? Like, I don't feel like that would ever cross my mind. I don't care how bad it gets. I will never, ever question, did I marry the right person? Never. Because I am so sure that this came from God. And because we allowed him to lead us, I think that's the biggest thing. So even like we didn't live together before we got married. So, people also look at that crazy. They're like, you guys you're paying two different bills. You're not benefiting from that. You're engaged. You're getting married anyway. So why not just move in together? And we chose to really honor God. Even, I'm like, how can we get this far and him bless us in this way, and then we get engaged and I'm like, okay, now let's go shack up and live together. Like, that would be such a slap in the face. Like, I felt like, and so of course it crossed our mind and things like that, but so when we got married and you're now living together for the first time, like all these new things, all these new transitions, like I can see how that could be really challenging. But when you have God at the center and you know that this is the person that God chose for you, there's no doubt, there's no questions. So when life gets hard, when marriage gets hard, you stay grounded in that, and you're always able to go back to that and remember the story that God wrote for you. And so you can just reflect on that, and it brings you, like when he makes me mad, I can reflect on that, those beautiful moments in our story, and I'm like, this, so we don't always represent ourselves the way that God sees us. But so even when he's not showing me that person that I know he is in God, or I'm not showing him that person, when I have we call them my Jenny moments. Jenny's my alter ego. It's like I'm still able to see it in him, even in those ugly moments, because of the story that God wrote for us, and being able to, there's so many significant moments, and so being able to reflect on that is everything. And those are moments we're never going to forget, ever. So even 40 years from now, when we're old and short-term memory loss, like, we are going to remember that. And so I think that has really helped us with this transition in marriage. I feel like we have transitioned very well, even better than people I see that were living together for years. Lived together for 10 years before they got married. And so you would think that they know each other inside and out. But the best advice that we got from the pastor that married us was, he said, when couples ask me about the transition to moving in together and all of that, he's like, I tell them, people that live together for 10 years and then get married, it's the same as you move. He was like, it's not any less of a transition than you two moving in together after the marriage. He was like, because no one is who they are. Who you see when you're dating someone is not who they are when you get married. Mm-hmm. So you could have been living with somebody for 10 years, but when you get married, marriage changes people. For, some for the good, some not, but it changes people. And so you could have been living with this person for 10 years, and then you get married and you're like, who are you? So we weren't living together. We didn't have that everyday, day-to-day together to get comfortable with something that wasn't really what it is. So I never got comfortable every day with this situation, and then had to get married and find out that's not really okay, now they're comfortable because now we're married. So now I'm going to see who they really are. We moved in together, seeing who we really were from the beginning, once we were already married. And so I feel like that transition has been more smooth for us than friends and other people that we have seen that did it differently. So
Yeah, I think confirmation is really powerful. And like just like you said, being having that confirmation from God just it eases your mind. It just you have so much peace, and I'm so glad that I waited as long as I did because there were a lot of times where I wanted to jump the gun and just do it and tell her I loved her, but having that confirmation means everything, and knowing that regardless of what happens later, God told you this, and you remember God told you this, and God told you in this way. You can't like it there's nothing better than that. You can't ever question what you have just because you have that confirmation. So I think that's the biggest thing is to wait for that confirmation.
And then there's always naysayers, people that are going to come around and be like, oh, are you sure about her? She has a child, and are you sure you're ready for that? Like, all of those things that can sow seeds of doubt if you don't have that confirmation from God. So if anything like that had come up with Festus, he knew for sure yeah, all of that is true, and I've never been a dad, but I trust that God knows that I'm capable of doing this if he has confirmed to me that this is my wife. So see you later. That's what it is,
Yeah.
like, so but had he not had that confirmation from God and someone poses those questions to him, it could make him think like, oh, maybe you're right. Am I ready to be a stepdad? Am I ready for this? Is this really what I want? Like, and begin to go down that road of doubting and questioning all these things because you never truly had that confirmation.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, because I think even without anybody saying that to me, I think that's questions I asked myself before I had confirmation. That's questions I asked myself, like, are you ready to be a dad? Like, are you, I mean, do you think you'd be a good dad? And are you ready for that? So prior to the confirmation, that's stuff that I was thinking. And it's something that God had to bring me to. And God was, very specifically, he said, would you rather have her know me and not, would you rather have her have a child and know me, or have her without a child and not know me? And that made it so very easy once he said it that way. He said, because from as long as you for as long as you've been a child, your prayer was that you would have a God-fearing woman. This is what makes her a God-fearing woman. So is it something that you can deal with, or would you like to have someone that doesn't fear me without that? So once I got that, shortly after that, I had my confirmation, and regardless of what anybody said to me about that, you would have thought I was a father already. It was very easy for me to just be like, no, you know what? God told me this.
And I never let him test it out because I never introduced my daughter to him. I never introduced her to him. So the only thing she knew of him was we used his Netflix account. I was still using it during the 2 years that we were broken up. So she saw this name on the screen whose account we would always go in, and she didn't know who Festus was, and she was like, oh, I'm going on to Festus' Netflix account to watch my shows. And so then once she finally did meet him and she found out his significance to me and all of those things, she was like, all this time, that's who Festus is? Like, she was shocked. For the last 2 years, I've been watching this guy's Netflix account. And I never met him, and that's who he was. And that's who you're going to be with. And like, she was shocked. But so that was an area, I never let him even try it out. Like, try out this whole dad thing. It was like, no, I'm not introducing you to my daughter.
And it's probably a good thing she didn't, because that may have scared me. That maybe I would have been like, I don't think I'm ready to be a dad. I don't think, because that would have been prior to me getting confirmation, and once you get confirmation, regardless of what comes into the situation, like that, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter anymore because you have your confirmation, you have your peace of mind.
And so I know there's a lot of women out there who are in my same situation, where you're a single mom and you're trying to date and you're trying to honor God. So in those moments where your flesh is getting the best of you and it's getting tough, like you love God and you want to honor him, but your flesh kind of gets in the way and you lose sight of it, one thing you never lose sight of is your child. And so especially when you have a daughter, they watch your every move. They see everything that you do. So even if you get in those moments where you're falling short of God, look at that child, like who's watching you and looking up to you and is one day going to mimic your steps. I mean, they do everything we do. And so I wanted more than anything for her to see and have an image of what this is supposed to look like. Like, God loves us so much. And so this beautiful story that I have, you can have that too. You don't have to settle. You don't have to live with a man. You don't have to give your body to a man. You don't have to do any of those things to be loved. You have the greatest love of all in God. And because he loves you so much, he's going to bring you the perfect person, and you don't have to settle for anything less. And so she has for years watched me go through life and go through the struggles and push really hard to get through school and get a good education and to be able to provide for her. And all these years, the majority of them as a single mom, and, you know, bringing her to church and trying to, you know, expose her to God as much as I could. And then, like, knowing that mommy doesn't bring different men around all the time, like, that was never a part of her life. Just, I know that she's going to carry that with her forever. And that when she does get to that age where she has to make these decisions, she's going to have the perfect model, you know? And all of this happened at an age for her that she's old enough to understand. So she was 10 when we got married. She's 11 now. And so she's old enough to understand, you know, and have seen that we really honored God every step of the way. We prayed, and we didn't live together. We didn't do any of those things. And she sees all that. So even beyond my relationship with God, that just means so much to me that I was able to provide that example for her. More than anything else, more than going to college and getting a degree and all these other examples you try to set for your child. Like, to me, the one that's probably the most impactful is showing her how much I love God and have chosen to honor him in my relationship.
Yeah.
My advice, it actually comes from a song. I can't remember the name of it now, but it says, "While I'm waiting, I'm not waiting." And I think that's so big that you don't take the word waiting literally, because when you do, you're just kind of sitting back and waiting for God to do the work, when there's a lot of work you can do yourself. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's so much you can do yourself. There's so much prayer you can do. There's so much fasting you can do. There's so much that you can do to work on yourself, to, you know, make yourself a better person for whoever that person God's going to bring for you. Because if you're a mess, and, you know, it's very simply could be that person's ready, but you're not, you know. So if you're waiting and you're not ready, you'll be waiting for a very long time. I think that's the biggest advice I can give, is that while I'm waiting, I'm not waiting. There's so much I'm doing. I'm fasting, I'm praying, I'm seeking God in every, you know, I'm doing everything I can. I'm serving, being in the church, you know, listening from God, getting into the Word. And when you're doing that, I think God starts to speak to you a lot better. And then he points out to you certain things that whether you need to work on yourself so that this person can find you quicker. Because if you're just going to wait, you'll be waiting a very long time.
God's always speaking. It's just a matter of, do we hear him?
Listen.
And
yeah.
So when you're dating and you're doing this, and, you know, it's so easy to be distracted and not be able to hear him. So you really sometimes need to just sit back, pray, fast, and silence the world around you. Just silence everyone, everything, and spend some time, a lot of time alone with God. And so, yes, we broke up, and when we tell people this story and they're like, oh my God, I can't imagine being broken up.
2 years.
2 years, that's such a long time. it really doesn't feel that long. And honestly, I feel like we broke up in the physical, but we were always together in the spiritual realm. So, and I feel like that the way we were able to get back together, and we literally picked up where we left off. There was no starting over.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like we were always together in the spiritual, and then when God brought us back together in the physical, we just carried on from where we were. And so that time, I wouldn't change it for anything. Of course, I wish it would have only been like 6 months of being broken up, but I wouldn't change it. It was
And if
so needed.
if we were, broken up for only 6 months, I would have still would have took the 2.5 years to propose. So
Yeah, I mean, he probably would have took longer.
Exactly.
So it would have ended up,
Still being
our
2 years
way. Our way would have been longer than God's way. I'm sure of it. I'm sure of it. So, my advice for singles is, just that silence, the distractions, because that really keeps you from hearing from God. And so, if there's any of my lady friends out there who are serial daters, or you have like a lot of guy friends, a lot of male influence and things like that in your life, I challenge you to fast men for 40 days and see how much you hear from God during that time. I'm telling you, it is going to change your life. And I actually have a friend who recently did that, and she asked me to go to lunch with her the other day, and we did. And I totally forgot that she had texted me about a year ago saying, remember that fast you did for 40 days? Can you explain it to me? And I did explain it to her. She proceeded with that fast. She met her husband shortly after, and she's now engaged to be married. And so I totally forgot I had even mentioned the fast to her. And she just this week said to me, she was like, I did that fast. And when I tell you that everything opened up after that, and someone I would have never, ever even paid attention to came into my life and tells me that he's been watching me for a whole year. She goes to this church. I won't put her on blast, but I was just like, wow. So I really feel like God brought her to share that testimony with me this week, timely for me prior to having this interview with you. Try it out. Prayer and fasting, maybe not 40 days, maybe 30, whatever you feel led to do by God. But don't just simply fast from food. Fast from men. It's a huge distraction. Or on the flip side, men fast from women.
Yeah.
I don't care if it's someone that, it's just a friend. It's just a friend that needs help with somebody. It's just this, it's just that. No, just if they're friends, they'll understand. Like, I'm spending some alone time with God. I don't want any distraction now. And your gender disqualifies you from speaking to me at this moment. We can reconnect 40 days from now. That's it. It's really not that difficult. And see how much God speaks to you during that time.
I love it. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank